Okay, you guys, let's go ahead and let's get into it. So the question is, do Blacks play victim? And I have Mr. on here with me. Oh, you have to mute us. I have Mr. on here with me because I think he's going to disagree with me. And maybe some of you guys can come up. Let's see how it goes. But I'm going to start with saying that, yes, Black people do play victim. And I think I want to kind of explain what I'm saying. So number one, there's the kind of victim that white people say that Black people are playing, which when somebody has done something wrong to you, or when a group of people know that an egregious act has been committed, when they are ready to be over it and they feel that they have paid penance and you should be out of your feelings, then they will say you're playing the victim. So I just want to put like their definition of when they accuse us of playing the victim. I want to put that to the side, all the way to the side. And I want to talk about why I think we play victim. I think we have been playing victim from the time we stepped on the slave boat. Now let's just talk about the diaspora. I think the diaspora plays victim. Just across the entire diaspora, I think we play victim. And the reason I say this is because we've never been in a position where we were not able, and I told Mr. I was going to try to be good, but I want to just keep it very real. We've never been in a position where we were not able to fight to the death against the many, many atrocities that have been committed against our people. And let me be honest, we will see that there have been a few examples of that being exactly where it was led. But at every time when I look throughout the diaspora, in every occasion, I see a point where Black people just give up fighting back. They just give up fighting back and they get into this woe is me mentality, and they know what's being done to them is wrong, but they don't want to engage in violence. And I'm not trying to push violence. I'm just saying when you're talking about things like, for example, what went on in Tasmania, when you have people outright killing you, you have to be willing to be violent back, or you're going to end up like the Tasmanians, non-existent. The Andaman Islands. This is like in the past, 50, 60 years. At first, they fought back. Eventually, they just gave up, though. Slavery. We had slave revolts, but everybody couldn't get onto the same page as far as fighting back consistently. I think, let's look at South Africa. What went on in South Africa? Now, what stopped those people from attacking those who were occupying their lands? When after the Berlin Conference, when the European came into Africa, there should have been one group either leaving or one group not going to be left alive. That's what it really should have come down to. There's no way that Leopold should have been able to run through the Congo like he did. Either all the Congolese were going to end up dead or the European was going to be ran off. Like one or the other had to occur. So to me, Black people definitely play victim because it is not out of our power to overcome anything that our people across the diaspora, and our people have been through some nasty things. We know what happened in the Congo eclipses the Holocaust. He killed more than 10 million people. 4 million people died in the Holocaust. 4 million Jews died in the Holocaust. King Leopold killed 10 million of just one group of Black people. We know the things that have happened to Black people have been egregious. Throughout the diaspora, on every single continent, the Black and the Native person, and some would argue the natives are Black, have had horrible, violent atrocities committed against them. But the only reason these things could happen is because at some point people decided they weren't going to fight. The reason colonization was so successful is that the people being colonized were not willing to match the energy of the colonizer. So to me, that is playing victim. To me, you are being a victim. To me, Kanye West said it and everybody got mad at him. Slavery was a choice. I cannot lie. It was a choice. Even if the choice was between slavery and death, you chose slavery. I know that is not a popular opinion, but I truly believe that. And I feel the same way today. Every time somebody opens up their mouth to complain about the status quo, you have made a choice. You have made a choice to not match the energy of the propagator of the problem. And since you are choosing to be a victim, because we aren't children out here, none of us are infants. Okay, an infant cannot make a choice. An infant is just the victim, right? A little kid, if it's a little kid and an adult, that's just a victim. If you have a big, burly, 300-pound man and a 5'1" woman who's 110 pounds soaking wet, she could be the victim. Okay, there's some cases where somebody is definitely a victim. Like you could fight, you can scream, you can do whatever you want. There is simply no chance, right? There's simply no chance. And this is not to excuse the things that have happened to our people. But the difference between a fighter and a survivor and a victim is how big of a fight are you willing to put up? Do you initially put up the fight? Do you initially start fighting and then you just are like, oh, it's just much easier just to let them treat me like crap. It's just much easier to let these people run me. It's just much easier. You know what I'm saying? To me, if I'm thinking, you don't want to remove these chains off of me, because should you ever unchain me, I'm going to gouge your eyes out. That would have definitely stopped slavery. If they knew the moment you unchain these people, they are going to try to kill you. You know, there is a rabbit. I think it's a rabbit or some kind of animal. Don't quote me on the animal. That apparently has some of the softest fur on earth. And people lust to wear this animal's fur. Do you know why we don't have any fur coats, fur muffs, fur hats from this animal? Because if you touch it, it drops dead and it makes the fur bad. So this happy-go-lucky, very silky furred creature is able to live its life because you cannot successfully trap it and gain anything from it. There's no gain for them. So they don't try to catch this little rodent. And I think that little rodent is a good example for our people. There should be no gain from interacting in a negative way with our people. It should be such a loss. It should be so much trouble. It should be such an issue to cross us that nobody would bother. But to date, throughout the diaspora, and this is attributed to our goodness. I know we're good, we're humane. I love all those things about us. It has never been more trouble than it was worth to conquer a group of Black people. We've never made it such a problem that they were just like, you know what, forget it. Just never mind. Never mind. Even if we manage to get them on the boat, if we unchain them, we know they're going to try to kill us. We'd never be able to sleep. We know they're not going to work. We could beat them bloody. I know that's easy to say, but I'm just saying, I feel we play the victim because we don't want to play the revolutionary. And I rest my case.
Wow. Okay. Where do you want me to start? I, I I think, and I'm gonna try not to play semantics here, but I think black we are victims, unfortunately, but we're victims to ourselves. So I agree with a lot of talking points you started off with um, this conversation with. Um, I would add that when Leopold ravaged the Congo, there was also um, cannibalism as well. So, and you mentioned that there were um, black revolts, Haiti, and several others, um, but we didn't hold on to that same type of fight. And historically, we've known that the reason who gets in our own way oftentimes is our own selves. A perfect example of that is in Allensworth, California. We were going to have another historically black institution in California, because Colonel Allensworth was good friends with Booker T. Washington. But who said no? Black folks said no, said we don't need that type of thing. So oftentimes, historically, the same thing with Golden State Mutual Insurance. My father used to work for a black insurance company. I believe it started was founded in North Carolina, and it came out here to California, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And so, why did that disband? Why did it go out of business? Because black folks said we need to be more integrationist. We need to do business with other white organizations, insurance companies. So we often get in our own ways. Um, but we have help get in our own way. We often have some people that are agent provocateurs who claim to be, you know, black as the tea kettle, right? Or black as the pot, but their work seems to be of of a negative ilk or of an ilk that supports white folks. And so when I hear you say victims, that we play victim, I think we do, but I think some things we can, like I think you alluded to this earlier. When we were being shot down and everything like that, I think we would agree those type of things, those are, we're victim of those things. Um, Historically, we've been victim of things, and we have fought back. But again, there hasn't been any systemic or sustained fighting back because a revolutionary practice is something that is seems like for us is difficult to maintain and uphold. Now, here's what I want to say to kind of push back on some of the things you're saying. I don't disagree with it wholeheartedly, but I think we should have a plethora of revolutionary tactics. And so, as you were talking, I'm thinking about the spook who sat by the door. And so, and again, this is a very, scary proposition because sometimes when people get in there, get in there and try to infiltrate, you know, they get caught up. They get sucked in by the lure, the power, the accolades, all, because white folks, ice is always cooler than black folks. So they get caught up in that world. And sometimes they forget their mission. And their mission is to, uplift and help black folks. And so the spook who sat by the door is a good example of that happening, that type of revolutionary practice that you're talking about, getting in and training people, kind of like that armed rebellion, that kind of guerrilla warfare. But, you know, those type of tactics get talked down by our civil rights leaders, by our people, by Black Lives Matters who say they're not violent. And so the people that are being propagated, they really don't speak about this type of praxis. And so if you are speaking of this type of praxis, you can't be upfront with it. You have to be very covert with it. So I'm not saying I disagree with it totally, but to say that we're not victims in the process of this type of practice, I think is incorrect because you could have scholars, you could have revolutionaries, you could have people on the ground floor who are doing this work, and they're easily picked off. So what is the protection from them? We're just going to, they shoot them, we shoot back and everything. Well, we know we're out armed, we're outgunned, we know those type of things. That doesn't mean throw your hands up and say, oh, woe is me. I'm not saying that. But I think we have to be very strategic in our approach. I think it has to be multifaceted and multi-tiered. Yes, there should be some armed rebellion. I'm not saying that I don't advocate for it, because I said it shouldn't be taken off the table. So that means that I do advocate for it. I mean, once you push back in the corner so far, you're going to have to come out swinging. So this is why you have the events that took place in Dallas where, the brothers shooting police and everything. You had things like happen in New York. You have people that get pushed to the ledge. But again, these people are pathologized and just, oh, well, they're crazy. There's this, there's that. And so we really have to look at it holistically, because there's systems, there's laws, there's all these things involved when we try to revolt and when we're trying to do things, extra legal means. We know the law is not there for us. So I understand what you're saying, like to crush everything and to build our own. But I mean, that's going to be very difficult in this day and age where everything is highly surveillance. I mean, we're on the platform on YouTube right now. You think people are not listening to what we're saying and saying, okay, those two Negroes right there, if they get any bigger, we know what to do to them. And so we really have to be shrewd and strategic about what we're planning to do. I always say, never let them see you sweat, never let them see you coming. But I don't disagree with what you're saying as far as us playing a victim too much. But I would say it's analogous to the boy who cried wolf, right? We cry wolf too often. And so we know that racism is a quotidian. I mean, it happens every day, right? I believe that racism is permanent. Critical race theorists believe that it's a permanence about it, and we have to fight it that way. With that being said, we know that just about everything we encounter has racial overtones and everything. But does that mean we have to say, oh, woe is me, this person is racist, so I can't do X or I can't do Y or I can't do Z? No, we can't pull that card for every little thing. And I think what happens is, and this is what I agree with you about this aspect of the victimhood, we play it so much that it's watered down. And I'm not saying that it's not valid, but again, when we really utilize that card, because we're not the ones propagating it, we're not the ones in control of saying, oh, yeah, that was really a racist situation right there. And oftentimes when we only get credence and credit is when our lives are taken. That's when this is really a racist act, because the person's life was taken. And so it's really a slippery slope, because if you're advocating for things and try to preempt them and saying, hey, this is wrong, we need to do X, we need to do Y, Z to prevent this, then you're the problem. You're the racist. If you're standing up saying, no, this is wrong, we need to do something about it, you would be excluded. You would be labeled a troublemaker.
Babe.
And so I don't know how to quite sort those things. I mean, you kind of have to do what we read several months ago. It's going to be that teddy bear effect. I mean, you have to wear the mask that grins and lies.
No.
I don't know if you can say, I'm going to cut your head off, white man, and I'm going to send it to your grandkids.
Well,
I don't know if that's going to move the needle.
So the chat, y'all are saying some very interesting things in the chat, and I would like to address some of the things you said, and then let Mr. address them, which I'm sure he will address them differently than I. Cassandra said, what's up, Cass? Debt slavery is more of a choice than chattel slavery. Slavery or die is not a choice. Now, I tried to respond to your question in the chat, and YouTube blocked my comment. I can't even unblock my own comment. And this is my response. If every slave chose to die, they would have stopped going to Africa to get more slaves. Just straight up. If every time they tried to bring slaves into America, the slaves were extremely violent to the point where they had to completely kill them, which ties into this next comment about guns putting Black people into slavery. Guns didn't put Black people into slavery. Guns can get you the ability to collect a person. But see, what the person does once you release them, is another thing. Guns didn't keep Black people in the field, nor did Christianity. Black people kept Black people in the field. They chose to be there. The slaves greatly outnumbered the masters. If we just use chattel slavery, because we could pick on any group of Black people. We could pick on South Africa. We could pick on Brazil. We could pick on Australia. We could pick on any group of Black people throughout the diaspora. They have always outnumbered their opponent. So Black people keep Black people.
Yeah.
And to bounce back to Cassandra again and what Cassandra had to say, if every time they try to bring, because I really want to emphasize this, and this is why I say we play the victim. We play that role good. We are not victims. Now, bad things were done to us. Bad things were done to us, but we are not victims. We don't have to be victims. A victim has no choice. To be a victim, you cannot have any choice. So we choose to be victims. That does not make what they did right, but we choose to be victims. And if every time they brought over slaves, if they either suffered violently at the hands of those slaves or they had to kill them all, they would have not been going back and forth to Africa for as long as they did. They would have stopped because there would not have been any benefit. Why waste all that time bringing over people who you're just going to have to kill? Because if you try to unchain them, they will try to kill you. They would have stopped going. Now, those people would have lost their lives, but they would have saved generations of people because they would have known, you know what, we might have liked to use those Black people as free labor, but they're too violent. They're not controllable. They're not malleable. So we can't waste our time bringing them over here. They're not going to do anything for us. And they would not have kept going. But because they got the message, they could tame us. They could domesticate us. They could train us like you would an animal. They kept going back and getting more bodies. Why not? It was clear that they could.
Well,
and can I just one more? And one last thing, I agree. I disagree with critical race theory because I think critical race theorists, I think that they play victim. Even the idea that it is permanent gives too much power to the people who implement racism. If racism is permanent, then their position in society is permanent. And if their position in society is permanent, it is almost saying that your position in society is permanent. And I just refuse to accept that. This is that mentality. It's a no. We have a choice. Nothing is permanent. It can all be undone. It can all be usurped. It can all be addressed. Y'all just have to want to address it. Okay, and I'll shut up.
So when critical race theory say racism permanence is what's meant by that, that means you have to fight it with the sense of permanence, like it's nonstop. And we know racism formulates through several axioms, right? It's in sex, government, all these different things. So there's never a day off because you have to fight it that way. But as you were talking, I'm looking at some of the comments. The thing of it is we have to talk about the mental enslavement. And I think you were alluding to that. I mean, because we know Harriet Tubman said that she could have freed, hundreds more if they didn't know they were slaves. I mean, so that's a big part of it. And so trying to get enslaved minded folks to understand that they're not that. And there were several people that understood that, but there were several others who felt that they were. Like, where are we going to get anything better than this? I mean, Master's treating us good and everything. We can't go out there and do that. It was that mental enslavement that really got in the way of a lot of uprising. I mean, there was a gentleman by the name of Hayward Shepherd, and so when John Brown and his sons went to did the raid at Hopper's Ferry, Hayward Shepherd basically ratted him, squealed and say, "Oh, this dude is about to come and raid us and get these guns and everything." And so he was shot and killed, but the Sisters of the Confederacy honor him, and there's a statue somewhere, I forget where, of Hayward Shepherd. But I bring that up to say this is the mindset of so many black enslaved folks had. Like, we're never going to get anything better than this. And so for those people who have this revelation, excuse me, those people that have this revolutionary practice like you, and they had it back in the day, they not only had to fight against these white enslavers, but they had to fight against these other folks who had this enslaved mentality. And so you're fighting on both fronts. And the same thing is still in place today. And now it's way more nuanced. And so it's just a difficult thing to try to thwart when you're fighting on so many different angles. And I'm not saying it's an impossibility, but it's very difficult when you have so many barriers in front of you.
So, I want to go back to the comment section, because y'all aren't going to slip and slide out of this. Okay. All right. No, let me say this. So, Ahmed said, there were slave revolts. They were not well documented. Cassandra said, who said slaves weren't violent? Now we're going to start blaming Africa. So those two comments are kind of along the same line. So let us be clear. I am in no way, shape, or form, and everybody knows that I'm Gullah. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying there were not slave revolts. But clearly, slave revolts were not the status quo, or slavery would not have gone on for hundreds of years. Let's keep it real. Let us keep it real. On this channel, we read a slave narrative where a slave literally said he thought about escaping, but then he thought about the nigger fights and the enjoyments of the plantation and thought he would stay put. That was an actual slave talking. So we're not going to sit here and sugarcoat this crap. We know that there were the Gullah Geechee who had a 50-year slave revolt. We know there were the Nat Turners. We know that there were slave revolts, but we cannot sit here and act like that violence was the norm or the majority of slaves, because there is no way slavery would have gone on for hundreds of years if the majority of slaves were behaving that way. So I give props to the ones that chose not to. But all that proves to me is that if the majority of people refuse to move, then the passion of a few does not matter. I can try to free you, brother. I can try to free you, sister. I could try to free us. But if you're going to cling to the leg of your master while I am trying to chop off his head, we cannot get anywhere. So please do not convolute me saying that we play the victim, that we have choices, but we choose not to make those choices because the choices may not be ones we like, which brings me to somebody else's comment. And what's up, family? And he is not the first to say it. Slavery or die is not a choice. No. It is a choice. It is a choice because a slave revolt could end in your death. And this could be a mental slave revolt. This could be the literal revolt of our ancestors. It could end in your death. But that is a choice. It may not be the choice that you like. I think that's more accurate. Slavery or die is not a choice that people like. You want option C, right? You don't want to be a slave and you don't want to die. But here's the thing. Those are not always the options that are presented. I think the thing that causes stagnation throughout the diaspora is that we don't like the situation we're in. We don't want to go to the other extreme that could end in us dying. So we keep looking for a middle ground where somehow we're going to get into a comfortable place of respect and equality without having to actually engage in the same behavior that got us into the position we are in. We didn't get into this position because of conversations or because of advocacy. We got into this position because of a great deal of violence that went on over a long period of time against Black people throughout the diaspora. So slavery or die is a choice. It just may not be the choice anybody likes. right? Because we want option C. Okay, I don't like option B. I don't want to be a slave. I mean, I don't like option A. I don't want to be a slave. I don't like option B. I don't want to die. Give me option C. Anything that prevents me from dealing with option A or option B is the option I want. Well, you know what? That is not how life works. There is not always an option C. And here's the thing. If you don't get option C, if you don't get this magical delivery out of slavery, magical delivery out of indentured servitude, if you don't get your option C and you're not willing to take option B, then you're playing the victim to me. Not to sound like Dr. Seuss, but I'm just saying, then to me, you're being a victim. Because what you're saying is, I don't have any choices I like. I would just rather whine in my state than actually do anything that's not really anything that I feel comfortable doing. I don't like my options. I would rather just complain.
Let's ratchet it up.
The options I have to take are ones that I don't like.
Let's ratchet it up. I'm gonna do something that I hate doing because I think it's a false equivalency. But let's take the Holocaust and let's see, was there much of a revolt, because we know they got paid and everything because they're more human, or viewed more human than Black folks were. But let's just take those and see, okay, atrocity. Of course, I think the enslavement of Africans was far worse, and we know that Black people were part of the Holocaust as well. But my point is, I think there was little resistance in comparison to the Diaspora, our brothers and sisters from the continent. And I'm not going to say everything worked out for them because the Holocaust was horrible. But as far as we know, they got paid and everything like that. And I'm not getting into the whole the witch-column issue with the money and all that other stuff, because that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But what are your thoughts about that? Because people always make the comparison, and again, I'm not trying to bring up the reparations thing, but I'm just saying, as far as the ways in which they were treated, and the pushback or lack thereof in comparison to what we're talking about here. And this is for you, Irene.
Wait, can you condense that question for me, baby? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the Holocaust, right? And I don't know, because I'm not a historian of the Holocaust. I'm pretty sure there was some resistance, but we didn't hear about too much, right? And just making the same argument. Now, again, I hate making the comparison between the enslavement of Africans and the Holocaust, but I'm just doing this for the sake of just conversation of the pushback, and people will say, oh, well, look, the Jews, and they didn't revolt, or they didn't do all that stuff and everything, and their people are, they turned out, they're okay now. I mean, it's still a horrific event, that happened to them, but maybe if they were more passive. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out. I'm not saying I agree with that.
No. I think that's valid. And I also, just real quick, I think that is an interesting question. Not necessarily that it's valid. I would agree with you. It's not necessarily valid. But Cass, I pass the blame on to us, because I use chattel slavery as an example, right? But y'all don't get fixated on chattel slavery. I said I could have used any group of Black people throughout the diaspora. I could just pick any country in Africa. I could just pick any country in Oceania. I could just pick any country of Black people. It doesn't have to be chattel slavery. We don't have to get caught up in that, because our behavior was the same throughout the diaspora. Just period. And Simone said, and I think at this channel, on this channel, we should second this, is we sat there and we listened to a publication that sits in the University of South Carolina right now, where in a medical journal that was publicly circulated in this country, they said the Black man has never been a competitor to the white man. So again, we don't have to, going back to you, Caslev, we don't have to use chattel slavery as the example. I could pick any group of Black people off that's been colonized on this planet, and I can use them as the example. I just use chattel slavery because we're all familiar with what happened there. But I could say any group of Black people. The diaspora is very consistent with how they react to somebody coming in and committing violence against them. We are ultimately submissive to the cause. Now, I don't blame them, slaves, any more than I blame us, slave. I don't blame them any more than I blame us. I blame us equally, because this is something that is perpetuated generationally. Now, to what Mr. was saying with regard to the Jews, I think there can be no comparison for two reasons. Number one, Jews are white. Let's just start there. Number two, the Holocaust is one event. It's one event. It's one thing that happened. The systematic oppression of Black people, people with Black skin, is a global phenomenon that has occurred on every continent other than Antarctica. 6 out of 7 continents. And when I say occurred, I mean en masse. I mean, like I said, the Congo eats the Holocaust and spits it out, and that's just one little frickin' country. If we compounded all the atrocities against Black people throughout the diaspora, if we just went, because you guys know this is like literally my pet project right now, the Andaman Islands and these freaking human safaris. Until these safaris stop, I will not stop talking about it. If we just took the Andaman Islands and the 6 tribes of people they killed in the past 100 years, if we just took the numerous populations of Native and Black peoples who have been complete genocide, then I really don't want to talk about the plight of the Jews. It's the comparison. There's no Jewish person that's part of a safari. Nobody's leaving this country to go look at Jewish people the way you do a tiger. But people are doing that to Black people. So I feel like I agree with Mr. It's a false equivalency. It's literally nothing the same. If you blow up the Holocaust by 1 million, and we might be halfway there. But to my original point, at the end of the day, the problem throughout the diaspora is something that colonization has taught about Black people, is that we'll fight in the beginning. And there will always be a handful of us that will fight. But most of us aren't trying to do that. We got 99 excuses, but fighting is not an option for us. Anything that's going to cause us to break a fingernail or get bopped on the head, we're not really trying to do that. We're not about that life. That's all colonization has really taught us about the diaspora. And so we have to examine what that is in ourselves, or it cannot be corrected. We will be forever talking about the bad things people did to us because they will keep doing bad things to us because they will know they can get away with it. You're not going to do anything. You might complain. You might tell them they're bad. You might say you're wrong. You might look how evil these people are. You might say, let's get together and talk about this. Let's educate each other about this. But all the talking and the education and the finger pointing in the world won't get them to stop, because they know they don't have to stop, because you're not going to make them. And I have never known a bully. I have never known an abusive person. I have never known a horrible individual who just woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm wrong for this. Let me stop. You're right. You've wagged your finger at me enough. It's time for me I feel guilty. In fact, you know what? The white man's bird in that poem said that we were half devil, half child, and that white men would be hated by the people that they conquered. He said, the hate of those you better. That's what he said in that poem. And sure enough, fast forward, here we are, 2020. And you have white people out here talking about, oh, they're playing victim. Oh, it's reverse racism. But they told you in the 1800s that was going to be the game. And you still don't want to do anything. Because what did a couple of you say? Because death is not a choice. So you've got to go with option A, which is your servitude. But you're going to complain all the way through that servitude and point at the master. You're going to point at him, point, bad you, because I don't want to take option B. Now, then we start looking at option C, reparations and stuff like that. Well, now we want money. We're like, we know that you've never shown a fair bone in your bodies. Your collective being has never been fair to us. But how about that fairness now? And I hate when people talk about the other people who got reparations. I want you to point out any reparations that were given successfully to any group of Black people. Just pick one. Australia got reparations, and half the people that get those reparations are white, like blonde hair, blue-eyed whites, saying that they're Aboriginal. I want you to demonstrate any reparations that have been given to Black people anywhere on earth from whites.
But anytime
any sort of empathy.
But anytime there's any reparations or what's been given to Native Americans and indigenous, always gets co-opted by white folks. They come in there and say, like little Pocahontas, and say that they're, a percentage Native and everything, and they get to reap the benefits. I mean, so we know these type of things have happened historically, and they still happen today. But I'll go back to my initial point. I think we're victims of ourselves more than anyone else because we get in our own way. I mean, we've had people that had this type of militancy about them. We had people that had this type of cool mentality, but often, like you were saying, unfortunately, they're more times the minority or minoritized than anything else. And so they kind of get drowned out because people want to go with the C answer or the D, and that's sad. I'm thinking of people like Robert Williams. I'm thinking about the Deacons of Defense, the people that protected those folks during the civil rights movies, i.e. Dr. King. Those people had guns. I'm thinking about Rosa Parks' grandfather. He had a gun, Malcolm X's father. They all had guns, so they were with that they were about that life of saying, listen, we're willing to, give and or take a life. And there was a lot of people like that, but they just get drowned out. So we have to think about the propagation of those folks, because we don't like to hear about people, such as Idi Amin. He gets pathologized, and again, I don't agree with everything he's on, but he was holding it down, right? But we don't like to hear about folks like that who didn't take any stuff and who, we call them, they're crazed, they're killers and everything. But wait a minute, King Leopold, you call him a king? And so I think we get in our way more so than anybody else. And we just don't have to just learn and study this, but we have to enact some of these things. And I'm not saying lock and step, but we have to read what they've done and see how we could get to the place where we're not always the victim. And so, like I said, we're the victims oftentimes because we get in our own way. And I think we cry wolf a lot. And I'll go back to my premise of CRT, that yes, racism, you have to fight it like it's permanent because it occurs in so many facets. So you can never take a day off. I believe that wholeheartedly. But I think we have so many people that get paid off and it gets propagated. Oh, look at them. They're tearing up their own community, this and that. But nobody said that when Tulsa, Oklahoma, when they're dropping bombs and everything. No one said that in 1984 when they literally dropped bombs in Philadelphia on the MOVE organization. So we've had organizations that were willing to do this, but the ways in which they're pathologized is that, oh, they're just clowns. They're just foolish. I mean, really the only organization that really didn't get that label and they kind of get it was the original Black Panthers. But then they said, oh, well, they just all wanted white women and they were just druggies. So, I stand corrected. They were pathologized too. So we have to make sure we're telling a narrative and we're learning from it accurately and not just learning from it, but acting on it. I'm thinking about the truce in Los Angeles where the Bloods and Crips got together, and how did that truce end? Because again, police staged it and they say, oh, they used to do drive-bys. The police were actually doing the drive-bys in the rival gangs neighborhood, and it started all over again. And so we have to just learn and read and not just react. I think we have to be strategic and systemic, and I think we have to have a multiple pronged approach in doing this. Because if not, I believe you and I agree. Yes, it's going to cost our blood, but we need to do it strategically. Can't just go out and say, okay, I'm just going to start popping off, because that's not strategic and that's not sustainable. But I think if we are going to, really use our intellect and really look in the past and see what worked and what didn't work, I think we may have a chance. But again, who gets in our way? We get in our way. And that's the unfortunate part. And we got to get to a point where we got to start, taking out some of our own. And that may sound crazy. And people, that's a very polemic, statement, very controversial. But if we're really serious about people getting in our way, we can love them. But, are we going to love them to death or are we going to love them to life?
Brother Moses, do you see something that needs to be corrected? You correct it if you feel it needs to be. But everybody's free to comment. If they disagree, I don't care, unless there's something totally inappropriate being said. I agree with just running amok not being the move, right? But I think that we have to separate as well the mentality, right? So when I hear things, and this is why I attack it so strongly, right? When I hear things like, slavery or death is not a choice. The reason I attack statements like that so strongly is because when we talk about liberation, right? We often figure death is going to come at the hand of reciprocating violence. But sometimes, and this has definitely happened, even in a peaceful movement. Now, y'all know I have my feelings about Dr. Martin Luther King. But for example, those were peaceful protests, were they not? And were the dogs not brought out? Were the billy clubs not brought out? Were the hoses not brought out? So when people are scared to fight and scared to die, they will say death or slavery is not a choice because they imagine themselves fighting and being harmed. But my thing is, being passive is no guarantee that you will live. So the first step in being able to progress is understanding that whatever your choice, when you decide that you are going to take a firm stance against the status quo, death could be the result. They might choose to kill you even if you never lift a finger to harm another person, simply on the strength that you're pushing back. So it is always got to be in your mind that you are choosing your servitude or you are choosing to see this through to the death. Whether that death come through your passive nature or your violent nature, you need to know that that is an endpoint, and that needs to be acceptable in your eyes and in your mind and in your heart, or you will never do what needs to be done. Again, whatever road you take. So that is why the first step is cognitive liberation, right? We have to be cognitively liberated. If you cannot even fathom the thought that you could see this thing through to the death. Again, let's take violence out of the equation, right? Because people get scared when they think you're trying to tell them to fight. If you can't even imagine the thought that you could end up in a certain position, how are you going to engage in any sort of meaningful action? Because even people who say peace, peace, and nonviolence have a bounty on their heads. So death has to be, in any kind of revolutionary movement, peaceful or not, death has to be something, a place that you're comfortable with. You must be comfortable with that option. You must be. You must reconcile your mind to that. That's the first step. We can't even have a conversation. There's no conversation to be had if you cannot even recognize that. Because like I said, if you never pick up a gun, you never punch a person in the face, you never do anything violent, your words can cause your death. You being adverse to the status quo could cause your death. Too many people listening to you could be your walking papers into the next life. So you must always know that when you are pushing back against a system that does not want pushback, that there could be a bounty on your head. And that bounty might get paid in the midst of a battle or in the midst of you giving a speech. So I push back on this mentality that slavery or death is not a choice, because if that is the mentality, where are we going? What are we doing?
So let me just chime in. No, I agree that there's obviously some trepidation about, the physical death, right? That we blacks that are, in a lot of sense of the word, still enslaved, right? We don't want that, right? And if we're being honest, nobody wants to die, but what are you willing to live for? And so I want to just pivot to away from the physical death. And I think some of us would, if we we're being honest, are just as afraid of the social death. The things that we would be handcuffed are the arrested development, right? So the things that we won't be able to do because of association with this type of revolutionary praxis and rhetoric, doing certain things that seem polemic or too black, right? And so, and that's why we kind of distance ourselves from certain people who are, controversial, or they're too black, or they're talking that black stuff. And so I think we're looking at, I think black folks have, this fear of multiplicities of types of deaths. And I think social death is a huge one, because again, we always want our 15 minutes of fame. We want to be on CNBC. We want to get the tenure. We want to get published. We want to do all these things. And if you're hit with that type of social death, then it impacts you economically, and impacts a whole lot of things. And so there's a myriad of ways that you have to be prepared for folks at you, like you were saying. You have to prepare yourself for this. I used to always say this, and my ex-wife used to get upset. I said, I'm going to die early, because what I stand for, what I do, and everything, and there's no way that, now I'm happy to be alive, but the things that I stand up for, the things that I do and have done, yeah, it's not a thing that people really like. And I used to be called a troublemaker. And so, you make people uncomfortable, they'll get rid of you, like they did to Dr. King, like they did to several of our leaders, right? And so I think King was resolute with the fact that he knew that he was going to die. Now, we can't take that away from him. You could disagree with his practice, Irene, but I think that he knew he wanted to live, but he even said it, I'm not going to be around. And most people that embark in this type of work, really and genuinely, they know that their time is not going to be long, because that's just the nature of the beast. That's what you signed up for. And so I think there has to be, this overstanding of that reality. And then, okay, then what are you going to do about it? So how are you going to set up your partner, your kids, and everything? If you know this is the case, how are you going to make sure you're not going to be there? But economically, and again, the money can't replace you, but how are they going to be taken care of? And see, these are the things that we have to look. I mean, if we're really talking about this seriously, that's why I say we just can't go willy nilly. Are we going to make sure we have, things set, policies, living trust, all these things in place to make sure that the revolution can continue? Because it shouldn't just die with the revolutionary. But again, that's what I'm talking about. We don't think forwardly. We talk about these things, but we don't really say, okay, this is how this is going to play out. We often play checkers instead of chess with this.
I agree. I want to, Armia said, I don't feel enslaved. Our situation may not be great. Whose is? But I'm never going to compare us to the plight of our ancestors. And you know what? Facts to that on a lot of levels. What I'll say is this. I will say that we may be even more mentally enslaved than our ancestors. Physically, I think Black people, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. Do you know what I mean? When I said, oh, I'm a revolutionary, but I live a comfortable life, right? So when we're comfortable, we're not feeling very revolutionary, right? Because our life's not so bad. I was actually saying this earlier, Armia. When we're comfortable, we go, I don't have it so bad, right? I don't have it so bad. But let's make no mistake that whilst on a grand scale, right? Technically, legally, the same things that occurred during slavery are not allowed to happen now, that those things do still go on, right? They do still go on. You can still be beaten to death as a Black man, right? You can still be enslaved into the prison industrial complex. And I mean, that's mostly who's there, right? Largest prison population on the planet
14th
is
Amendment.
disproportionately Black men. What would you say?
Yeah, the 13th Amendment, excuse me.
Right. So while I agree it's not apples to apples, it's become more, there is a film over it. I would say that the mechanism is still the same, right? But
Yeah,
different. And it's
yeah,
not.
I would agree with.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I just would frame it a little bit differently as far as comfort level, because when I think of a revolutionary, it's not about the individual comfort level. We're looking at us as a whole. So just because I may be in a spot of comfort, and or my family is, but when I look at the masses of our people, then I'm not comfortable. I mean, so physically, yes, I am, but I know there's more work to be done because our people are still suffering. And some of it is arrested development, and some of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, we have to just be real with that. Some of us bring these things onto ourselves. We know there's some systems in place that allows for that, but sometimes we can navigate it differently. But there's things that, I feel as a revolutionary, when I see my brothers and sisters struggling, I'm like, okay, I know there's more that I could do. And so that's how I look at it personally. And again, not everyone's going to be at a place where, it's all kumbaya as far as Black folks, but we know that there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Do you think we need to carry this out, or do you think we should wrap? Mister.
We could go. We could go for a little more.
Okay.
No power is being taken back to South Africa. We're unprepared.
Yeah, they're talking about, so this is because earlier, Amin, let me try to find yours. Earlier, Amin said in South Africa they have the EFF, which is questionable. I like Black First Land First better, Amin, but both of them I think are trash. But if I had to pick, I would pick Black First Land First for who not that I think anything's going to get accomplished in South Africa. First of all, let me start here. I don't see anything getting accomplished in South Africa. Nothing meaningful. Okay. The okie doke has been going on for too long down there. But what I will say is if I liked the rhetoric of Black First Land First. I liked, and I even on this channel use them as examples of how to hold an honest conversation, about what the deal is. Like they would be on hold. This was like a flashback to the 70s, where Black people would come on and they'd be on, doing debates at universities and, on the news and on talk shows and just like not giving a crap and just putting it out there for what it was. I was so refreshed by Black First Land First when they initially started speaking. It was just nice to hear somebody just not be politically correct and just put it out there. But I don't think anything's going to get accomplished by either organization down there. Here's the thing. When we talk about legally and economically, all that legal means is that there is a status quo, right? So let's use South Africa as the example. The Berlin Conference happens. Cecil Rhodes is given South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Those are where he colonized, right? He had his private paramilitary armies kill about 60,000 people. He started a land grab. He created a bunch of laws. Like, remember, we're talking about South Africa. He created a bunch of laws that basically made it so Black people couldn't vote in their own country, right? This is South Africa. So random white person is at the Berlin Conference, comes down in the name of Britain, starts a paramilitary army that kills 60,000 South Africans, facilitates the murder of hundreds of thousands of others, then proceeds to create laws so that they can't vote. Remember, this is what brought in apartheid. So we have to talk about this. Creates laws so that they can't vote in their own land. So they can't own land and they can't vote if they don't own land. Okay. Then he revives the Master Servants Act so that you can now torture your Black employees, if you want to call them that. And this is the foundation for apartheid, right? So when we talk about legally usurping what has happened and legally doing restoration in South Africa, you're talking about legally as in operating within a system that was started by Cecil Rhodes that is bullcrap. And they need to have a social political revolution and tear down that whole government, because everything that sits in South Africa now is at the hands of a mass murderer. So when we talk legally, what we're talking about is operating in a legal system created by killers. So I don't understand that. I don't understand these. I don't understand these when we have these conversations. What does legally mean?
Well, Irene, I think you're being a little too hard, because they've gotten rid of several of those Cecil Rhodes statues and everything. So they're making progress.
You think they're making progress?
I was being sarcastic.
Is that what you said?
I mean,
oh, okay. I was like,
I was being sarcastic. I mean, the fact that they get rid of some statues and everything, and people are jumping up and down the street and everything. And I'm like, that was a symbol of oppression. But the oppression is still ingrained, like you articulated so well earlier. So you still have the systems in place, but you just got rid of a statue. And here in America, we still have the Rhodes Scholar. And everybody's trying so hard to be a Rhodes Scholar, but they don't even know where it stems from. And so these things are still in place. And when these systems or when these symbols are taken down, and people think like, oh, okay, well, just like the the racist statues that were taken down the South, just like they stopped flying the Confederate and some of the Southern states, and everybody was like, "Oh, we we have arrived." And I'm like, "Really?" You know, I mean, look at the laws that are in place, but you're fixating and stuck on the symbol. I mean, sometimes that's what I say. I go back to we get in our own way because we don't really realize what progress really is. But we think when the symbol is removed and everything that we've actually done it something, and that couldn't be anything further from the truth.
Yeah, I think that is really important. We do accept symbolic progress, right? We don't need real progress, but if you can give us a symbol of progress, we will appreciate that. And some of my least watched videos on this channel is when I did my cognitive liberation series, and where we went into the European scholarship with regard to how revolutions start, and that scholarship is how they determine how society works today. And a lot of that is tokenizing progress, right? So they found that if you tokenize progress, if you allow people to feel involved, if you allow them to feel like they're economically upwardly mobile to some degree, that they will not revolt, right? So you don't have to, and this is crazy, right? Give them enough power to actually effect any change. But if you make them feel like they have a voice, if you make them feel like they're part of society, then they'll be content and then they will not revolt. Because what they have found over time and years of imperialism and colonization is that they tend to have uprisings. Because remember that all of the European royalty were related, right? Heavily inbred throughout all the European countries. And a lot of their family got thrown out of their positions. And so as they were colonizing places and as they were watching their family be massacred within Europe, something that they learned is that you have to give the people something to feel comfortable and happy. If I feel comfortable, when I go home, I've got food, I've got a car, I have some entertainment, I have some distraction, then I can overlook some obvious issues in the system. And so if I feel like, okay, I see a Black person, they're a part of the Senate or they're a part of the House, or I get, a mulatto president. Granted, he didn't really do anything for us, but he was there. The symbol, the brown skin symbol was there. Well, then we're like, okay, there's progress. When in reality, right, we're actually moving backward. Our households have less money, right? Our homes are more broken. A huge part of our men are in jail. We have communities where you start with the men outnumbering the women, and between death and jail, the women start outnumbering the men when they reach about their 20s. So we have all of this symbolic progress, as Mr. said, that makes us feel comfortable because we can look at our individual lives. And if we all do that, none of us will ever do anything, right? If I look at my individual life, I don't have a problem. I don't know of any of my family members that are incarcerated.
Well, if we take that step further, looking at the symbolism and the ways in which they use that, it's masqueraded to seem like we're making some type of real progress. And then that gets caught up with the racism, So again, you could just elevate Black person him because of course we got to be inclusive of everyone else, right? And so those are the types of games that start to be played, especially when you start talking about affirmative action, which has been pushed back upon and just eradicated, right? And so, but we go for that. We go for that all the time. I mean, this last president election, or this current president election, and we had 2 Black people on there, and I think they were probably the worst, 2 of the worst candidates on there, not because they're Black, just because I didn't think they were very good. But we just go with anything that's Black and symbolic, and I'm like, no. And they know that that's going to gravitate towards us. I mean, so if any one of these nominees select Booker or Kamala and everything, Black folks gonna lose their shit. they're going to go nuts. Oh yeah, I got to vote for them. Why? Because it's symbolic. And again, the Democratic Party is really good on playing on those sentiments, and Black folks fall for it all the time. So when we're talking about being a victim, I keep going back to it. We oftentimes get in our own way, and we allow the victimhood because again, we're so easily appeased with this fake symbolism. And I don't know when are we going to learn. If we didn't learn from Obama, I doubt if we ever learn.
Well, I mean, maybe so. Maybe so. I don't think, I think that we feel, and somebody was saying that in the chat. Who was it was saying it? Deanie was saying it. What's up, Deanie? From where we were, it's progress, right? And I feel like I think a lot of people feel that way. But I'll tell you the measure of progress. I'll tell you what the measure of progress is, right? Collectively. You know, Mr. was talking about, so I said, we have to resolve ourselves that death is going to be option B, right? And Mr. expounded on that thought and he said, and that death can come in many ways, right? So we're not just talking that physical death. We're talking, it could be financial death. It could be social death, right? There's a lot of ways you can die. And honestly, all those deaths are deaths that we fear, right? We fear the loss of our livelihoods. We feel the loss of, you know, that social loss. We fear the loss, that monetary loss. We fear the loss of the bubble that is our comfort, right? A mark of an actual revolution is that you start to suffer those little deaths, right? Because if you're stirring the pot, something is going to get upset. So if there's no sloshing going around, if nothing's falling out the pot, it's not being stirred. So progress is not, and I think that's why it's good Mr. brought up Obama. Progress is not having a president who has skin very similar to yours in office, but who won't actually deal with any Black issues. That's not actually progress. Because I can put a puppet anywhere. But if the puppet is only going to do what I say, it doesn't matter what the puppet looks like. We have how many Black caucuses? What do they do collectively? So we have all this representation, all this progress that we've made, right? We have a few Black millionaires and billionaires. And although they make up 0.5% of the Black population, we feel that's progress. We got that 0.5%. Let me give it more. We got that 1%. That 1% of the Black population is progress. That's literally what we're saying. Most of our people live in abject poverty. Let's just keep it 100. Most of our people live in abject poverty. Most of our people do not have access to a proper education. Most of our men encounter law enforcement and are arrested at some point in their lives. Even our well-to-do families have to work harder and produce more than their white counterparts of equivalent status in education. And you don't climb too high up on the totem pole without being willing to do some separation from your own people and debasement of your own people. It's simply not possible. So maybe the question is what we choose to view as progress. Is it that we are so deprived of progress that anything that makes us feel, even if it's 7 times removed from something that resembles progress, if it occurs, we latch onto it because we are like a thirsty man in the desert, We'll take that one drop of water from your pinky toe and we will cling to it and make it as if it is a swimming pool, because that is how desperately we want to see ourselves progress. But we can't get caught up in the delusion of progress or the illusion of progress, because it's both. It's a delusion and it's an illusion.
Well, I agree with that. And we're going to spend probably another 7 minutes. I would say this as we get ready to come to a close. Black folks, I know you said, basically, we're going to have to give our blood for this and, and be willing to die. And I concur with that. And I'll say, and that's a hard hurdle for some of us to get to. I mean, if we're being honest, a lot of us are like, well, I don't want to die. But if we want to win, right? And there's a term called a Pyrrhic victory. So if we don't want to just outright die, I think we have to understand the concept of what a Pyrrhic victory is. And that's where you may suffer some losses. Like I was talking about the social death, the various types of deaths. You may not have that physical death, but if you're really serious about this particular revolutionary praxis, then you have to make sure that you're willing to be part of a Pyrrhic victory. And you're going to take some L's in that, but you're going to ultimately have a victory. And I think if we could position and frame it that way, then maybe we could, maybe it could be more palatable. Maybe we could stomach a little bit better. I would hope, because again, anybody serious about this work, you're going to incur some Pyrrhic victories. You're going to take some L's. You're going to take some setbacks, and ultimately it could be your life. And so again, we just have to be, okay with that. And I know we have partners, we have kids and everything, like I alluded to earlier. But again, we have to be very serious and strategic about this. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. We have to get out of our own way. I think the victimhood is primarily because we're in our own way and we're scared of the real revolutionaries, doing what they need to do. And so I hope that we could just understand that concept and actually live it out, because if not, nothing's really going to change. And we have to do it in a multiplicity of ways. We can't just do it, try to ride on people and drive by, stuff like that. That's not going to work. But it has to be strategic in order for it to be sustainable.
Oh, Cass, I think that might just be YouTube. So if a mod doesn't catch it and unblock it, I think YouTube automatically does. But I can't see things on StreamYard. I have to go on my phone. I can't see any comments to approve them. So that might be why. So this is what I would say. I will say, so I want to address what RBR brought up. RBR brought up the things that Obama had done. So Obama may have allocated about $100 to $150 million to RBR brought up HBCUs, things like that. Our budget is $2 trillion. So like I said, the drop of water off the toe. You know what I'm saying? Because it takes $100 million, right? To even tap into $1 billion. And our budget is $2 trillion, as in try. So that is nothing. He did nothing. These numbers sound big to us because we don't have that money. But in the grand scheme of what this country spends in the trillions, that's nothing. It is a drop off the toe, and a dirty toe at that. I just want to give like my closing, because Mr. gave us 7 minutes and I think we're just down to 2. And I just want to say that, do Blacks play the victim? I think not in the way that white people say. White people say Black people play the victim because they don't like feeling guilty. They feel some level of guilt. They feel guilt for what their ancestors did in the same way that we feel badly for what our ancestors went through. They feel that attachment to their ancestors as we feel to ours. And they don't like that feeling. And so they say that we are playing victim because they want us to shut up. What I am saying is screw them. I am telling you that we are playing victim because we have seen the history of our people throughout the diaspora. We see where countless times our people went wrong. And that is because there is a level of pushback we are not willing as a whole to pass. That is not to say that groups of Black people didn't try to push that threshold. That is to say that the majority of us will not. And so at this point in time, right, now that we have reached this stage of things, it is now playing the victim if you refuse to cross that threshold. Because there are no excuses anymore. You don't have to simply stand by and point and discuss and feel frustrated at what is going on. You can be active in stopping this thing and improving this thing in a way that is meaningful and measurable. And that applies to not just the token Blacks, but also the rest of us, the majority of us. And so my stance is yes, we play the victim. Black people play the victim, maybe not in the way that we are often accused of playing the victim, but we choose to be the victim over choosing to do the things that make us uncomfortable. We would rather cry victim than be put in a position where we must do things that are going to upset our comfort. Like that old slave said, and for those of you who did not see that video, I will try to link it later to the end of this live. Like that slave said, he thought about escaping, but then he thought about the nigger fights, and he thought about shucking corn and all the enjoyments of the plantation, and he figured he would stay put. He didn't want to suffer all of those different types of deaths that Mr. spoke of. So he chose to stay put. I would encourage you to choose not to stay put. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later.